Welcome back then folks to day 2 of Special Projects Pack 13, this time a car which is certainly close to my heart, not so much for the specific vehicle but more so because of the brand behind it. Especially in the past couple of years or so, I've really become a super fan, to be honest, of Tommy Kaira. I really love their cars, I love how wacky they are, how super obscure they are, and how they're just kind of doing their own thing. They don't care about necessarily even being the quickest things around. They almost feel like they're kind of like the approach that I like to take with my signature tunes. Of course, theirs being real, which is a vast improvement, wherein they're more about like the overall experience of being fun rather than necessarily winning races or breaking lap records. They can make tremendously quick cars like the ZZ2, but they're just as happy making stuff like the M13, which is still one of my favourite ones of theirs, and it's a dream of mine to own one of those. Maybe I will. This one is a car which until relatively recently I didn't even know existed, an M14, but not based on the Micra. It's based, as you can tell, on the newer shape Suzuki Swift Sport instead. I'm basing this on the real life specs, and this is in particular a replica for the Stage 3 version, which has about 200 horsepower. So that's pretty good from a Swift Sport. It's already a quick enough car, but they made it even quicker. They upgraded the turbo, upgraded the suspension. Now, we had to do a couple of things which technically go further than 200 horsepower in order to bring it back to that level while having the correct upgrades to make it feel authentic. So you'll see what I mean as we get into it. As far as the initial stuff, we've got the sports computer. If I recall correctly, though, you don't actually need that because I've gone for the racing one. So you can skip over that, and we'll come back to the reason why in a second. So avoid the sports computer for now. Avoid the sports silencer as well. You also don't need that, and I'll come back to why. You do want your sports pads, though. As far as the tyres, I've left it on the Comfort Softs because obviously it's more of a real-world street-level kind of car, and I wanted it to feel that way. As far as the Club Sports section, we've got the sports clutch and flywheel. The power restrictor, I have not opted for the ballast. You don't need it for this one. As far as the semi-racing stuff, the low RPM turbo, because in real life Tommy Kaira did uprate the turbo on this one. The semi-racing silencer is purchased, but again, I've got the racing one, so don't buy that one either. I bought all three because I was checking which one looked the most visually accurate to the real thing, which is why I went for the racing one. I know technically that is overkill, but if you look at a picture of the real car, it's got some big pipes on the back, and the racing ones look the most accurate to that. The fully customized computer, you'll notice as you build this car, you're going way beyond 200 horses, but of course we'll rein it in a second, so bear with me. As far as the suspension, you want your height adjustable sports springs and dampers, which is similar to what the real car has. It does have adjustable suspension. As far as the racing stuff, like I said, the racing silencer, that's pretty much it as far as the racing bits. For the extreme stuff, it's not necessarily realistic, but I always like to go for the steering angle adapter. Of course, it's primarily for drifting, but it does help with your turn-in on corners as well. Just a little bit of a bonus there. So, of course, you don't have to go for that technically. A few different people have done liveries for this one. Of course, anyone who uses my builds before will know that there's a link to it in the description if you want to grab it from the player's version. Like I said, there are a couple of different ones. This one looks pretty accurate to the real thing. The only thing which is slightly off about this one, I would say, is that the wheels could have done with being a bit darker of a shade, but it doesn't matter too much in the grand scheme of things. It's more than close enough. As far as the tyres, of course, those are still fitted as standard. For the suspension, 80mm on the ride height, 1 on the anti-roll is stuck as is, 35 and 45 for the dampers, 1.95, so not too crazy on the springs, 0 camber on the back, just a little bit on the front, help with that turn-in, of course. The toe is set as standard, and you can't adjust that either. I've left the diff standard as well, which is something which I don't often do. You'll probably have noticed just now I didn't buy the limited slip diff, which is highly unusual for me. Usually I do like to do that, but I wanted to try it without it first, see how the car performs, and to be honest, it doesn't really need it. You could go for it if you want to, but you don't necessarily need to. As far as the ECU, this is where we get to the bits in terms of reining it back in to the 200 horsepower level. So set it down to 86% with these parts over here fitted. So in particular, like I said, the low RPM turbo, the racing silencer, and then the other stuff like the pads and all that obviously doesn't matter. So the reason why I went for the racing exhaust, like I said, was mostly for the visuals. It happens to sound pretty nice as well. Then with the turbo, of course you have to do that because that's what they did, and then just rein it in a little bit to the right horsepower level. Thankfully, the ECU brings it to exactly 200 horses, which is nice and rounded off. And even the point level is pretty modest. It's already a fairly lightweight car. 481 points is pretty good. Of course, that's on comfort tyres, but still. So all that remains, naturally, is to, of course, jump out to the track, this time autopolis, to show you what it can do in practice. Now, I fully understand that for most people, you won't have even clicked on the video. So first of all, if you did, thank you for that. You're taking a risk, and I appreciate it, because to me that's what the Tommy Kaira M range is all about. The M13 is one of my absolute favourite Tommy Kairas, and at the risk of somebody potentially stealing it away from me, there is actually one for sale in the UK right now. It's white with the silver stripe, it's one of 5 in the world, and it's £9,000, which is a lot of money for a micro, and I would absolutely buy it, and maybe I will, but at the moment I'm spending a lot of money on the rolls, so I can't really justify doing both. But if it's still around, I may end up owning a Tommy Kaira, but we'll have to wait and see. This one though, being that kind of evolution of the idea of that small sports hatchback with a hell of a lot more power than the M13, that's for sure. My only note on this one is that, as you would assume, with a 200 horsepower front wheel drive car on comfort tyres, it does have a bit of torque steer. The steering angle adapter I do definitely think helps with that, and that little bit of camber on the front, but overall it's a really fun little car to use for something that's so minimally changed, which ironically that actually ties into what Tommy Kaira kind of wants the car to be. Minimal changes with maximum effect. I think it was something to that effect, and I love that idea. I'm a big fan of that kind of idea of having a big change in performance without doing much necessarily to get there, which is, for example, why I say about, you know, putting a better transmission in a muscle car. You've now immediately given yourself like 20, 30, 40 miles an hour more top-end speed and made the car so much more competitive just by doing that one thing. I love that kind of idea. This is a prime example of that. So if you do decide to use it, I hope you have a ton of fun with it. Maybe you've got a Swift that you're not doing anything with, for example, and who knows, you could even use it for some events. So I'll see you next time with more. Of course, check out the other builds this week, and until then, I'll see you next time. But for now, thanks for watching.